Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Monday. Tuning in. I'm not tuning in. You're tuning in. Another conversation about pricing strategy with Bryan Ossa. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic and definitely appreciate being back here on Monday. And I heard I'm not tuning in, you're tuning in. I immediately flash back to elementary school days. You're like, I'm not this, you're this, and you just kind of like quabble between each other for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. What is the philosophical understanding of this show? No, not going to hit that. Well, maybe we will. That's the beauty of this
We could totally,
series
that would
and
be
the
a
way I
fun
like
day. We
to
should do that.
do content. Kind of let the conversation where it needs to go
Hmm.
to hit all the levels. Uh, but today we're started a series last week. I think we actually started talking about it before that. Just pricing strategies,
Hmm.
something that everybody has a lot of challenges with. I think when you start to grow and scale, like a lot of the X plus Y equals Z isn't going to work anymore. And how do you grow into other things? How do you manage margins and scale as you do that? So we started running through some strategies, and today, and we're talking about competitive strategies, but I'm going to make sure we take some time to look at some things in HubSpot
Hmm.
to show like why it's important, like to have a clear strategy. Because if you don't, while your sales people and your sales team can execute the strategy for you, there's lots of tools in HubSpot to allow them to do that.
Hmm.
If they don't know when to discount and when not to discount, why they should discount, what the margin needs to reach, they even have access to the cost information that can help. But if you don't have the strategy, then you're probably not going to get value out of those tools. So we'll be sure to show you some of that today. But yeah, man, why don't you set the stage for us?
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and I appreciate you kind of taking the time to define and share what that looks like. And for those of you who didn't tune into us with us last week, a lot of what we were building was based off of the HubSpot pricing calculator, which you can just search online and you'll find it immediately. It's a free download, and once you have access to it, you have everything that you need in order to put together your pricing strategy. And what that is going to ultimately translate to is the spreadsheet that you are about to see. And so we'll go ahead and get that fired up so you have access to it. And so this is kind of what we're looking at and everything that we're using in order to build out your pricing strategy. Last week we went over the cost plus pricing, which focuses on pretty much taking the price of your good, and then you have your upsell. Today, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on what's called competition-based pricing. Setting the stage really quickly, competition-based pricing is essentially the concept of benchmarking against your competitors in order to have a similar kind of pricing model. So this is extremely common in online e-commerce stores as well as with B2B SaaS products, and honestly, a lot of agencies too, who are trying to be provide competition to each other, provide that value-based pricing, of course, but also while understanding your value, that may differ in different parts of the world or different states throughout the U.S. And so you want to make sure that you're staying in line with your competition so that you can provide the right amount of uh, bang for your buck, really. And so this whole calculation that we're looking at here really boils down into a couple of automatically calculated variables, your price based off of your price and your competitor's price. And getting these numbers is probably the most challenging part of this process. And that's where you really want to spend some time doing your competitive research. And so that's where I'll throw kind of your way, Chris, is just like how do you go about doing competitive research? Like, what is the advice that you give to clients when they're wanting to put this information together to define how to put themselves in the market?
Well, usually I'm suggesting they do something else first. Uh, I think a lot of times we over index on what somebody else is doing uh, instead of what our customers are, just plain out asking us for directly.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think, and sometimes that's where your competitive research, needs to start or should start is talking to your customers and saying, hey, like you went with us, or if it's closed lost, you didn't go with us. Who did you go with? Why did you go with them? Because you can do some surface level stuff on websites. You fill out some demo forms with your fake email address, and maybe you'll get some info, maybe you won't. Uh, but generally, I think those two, avenues are the best, ways to get started. But again, um, understanding what your strategy already has been by looking at your customers uh, and how have you sold the stuff? How has that gone already? And again, tying it back to the overall strategy and why this relates to mapping in HubSpot. It's if your process doesn't include like two things, it's very hard for you to dig into this. And that's one, like closed won, closed lost, like reasons and information, right? Like, why did we win? Why did we lose? Uh, Closed debriefs at the end of deals can go a long way towards helping. But in the beginning, I find that so often there's a stage missing that we just focus on activity. And it's like, did we do the demo? Did we do the quote? Right? At some point, there's generally a strategy conversation that needs to be had in situations where it is a more complex buying cycle. There's competitors out there, but like you get the opportunity, and like, what's the sales strategy now? Like having that conversation, because it can be very different when you find out a competitor is involved versus not being involved, right? If there isn't one involved and one's out there, how do you manage the process that helps them not, you know, or proactively, help them understand what all their options are, get out ahead of that. But if one's already involved, okay, now what kind of, unlearning do we have to help the customer do to help them understand our value add? Uh, what kind of pricing strategy is this going to force, if we really, really want this deal? Right. So those two kind of beginning and end points, if you haven't been doing any of that, one, get started, like start doing that, please. There's lots of templates out there. Um, but that should be the best source of information. It needs to be, right?
Yeah, and you're exactly right, and that's the whole value and importance of having different kinds of pricing models like we're looking at here. Because while we're mentioning on competition based for today, it's not the sole thing that you should be pulling your data from. It's informative. It is very helpful for doing research, but unless you're tying this all together, get to to this higher level of how you're going to be bringing people onto your customer base, just following the template is not necessarily something that you should just do blind. Uh, it's something you want to be very intentional and diligent about choosing your information about. And so, taking that into practice, as it aligns for doing some research for how you might want to do this. Example I have today is really just using HubSpot. And when you're looking at HubSpot, you have we're going to assume for a minute that this is different kinds of agencies offering the HubSpot onboarding experience instead of the actual pricing models based off of contacts. But essentially, the onboarding fee that HubSpot asks for at the professional tier is $3,000. And so When you're a HubSpot partner and able to provide these onboarding services for folks, you're able to waive this fee. However, that $3,000 is a good place to kind of just benchmark and keep yourself established and in mind for. So maybe seeing this initially and you want to go under the competition, you now have your baseline of 3,000 of your competitor's price. You can throw that into your calculator, and now you have your basic information about where your competition is and where you currently are. And this is where coming up with that decision for what you want to price it at goes back to everything that Chris was just mentioning. And that's that entire conversation that you need to have internally in order to make sure that you're doing this in the right way and for the right reasons. But let's say you've had that conversation and you decided, you know what, we can have a good takeaway if we do onboarding for say 2,400. You now know that you're based off the competition, you're now 20% less than the rest of those who you're going up against. And if you're doing more of this research, you should have a really good idea of how many instances you're going to be selling this. If you're assuming on a going basis, let's say you've been doing HubSpot onboarding before, you've been doing it the same price for $3,000, and you're only getting maybe 2 or 3 a month. If you update this and you're done your research and you're assuming, maybe you're getting get somewhere around 6 a month now, you can then see what the pricing model looks like for your projected revenue and your gross margin for what it is now versus if you were to change that number back to what you were charging and that units that you were charging, the units you were kind of earning per month. Just looking at this immediately tells you how much more profitable you're going to be by decreasing your cost by 20%, assuming you get more units sold. You're going to be bringing up an additional 10% in profit, even though you're undercutting your competition by 20% overall. And there's an important thing to keep in mind is bandwidth there, because if you're doing this, you've got to make sure you fulfill on it. And that's all kind of bringing this whole cycle conversation to what we've been going back and forth about, using your business strategy and putting that together and having a defined process for what's going to enable you to facilitate putting together an effective pricing model. Because at the end of the day, you can charge whatever you want to charge, but if you don't fulfill on the value of that, or honestly, not even the value of it, if you don't fulfill, period, there's no point to building any of this. There's no point to thinking about any of this.
Yeah,
And
gotta deliver.
that's your whole purpose.
Yep, delivery is important. And we're talking about, I think HubSpot onboarding costs and pricing are just the most perfect example right now, because we know we're hearing a lot of stories about onboarding's gone wrong and people have to clean up, and there's costs and pricing related to all of that. And you see people that offer, like, this is often the reason that like loss leaders exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that I'm new to the game. There's a bunch of other people doing it here, so I'm going to offer free onboarding because I know that I'm going to develop relationships that people appreciate, and it's going to lead to my higher dollar offerings, which are very, very profitable, right? But I know if I can't get them as a HubSpot customer, then there's no chance of me selling them those high profitability items. The other options we have are people doing very, very low cost onboarding, because that gets customers in the door, but they do it for a different reason. That's like putting points on the board, like putting partner points on the board. And that is the value that they see, like that if they continue to tier and that, their reputation increases, that's a way to get the volume, that they want, and just keep doing that. At the other end of the spectrum, we have very, let's say technical, uh, you know, not even just RevOps agencies, but just agencies who've been in the game for a while. You know that they're all over LinkedIn. They post a lot. It's clear they're very knowledgeable, and they have very very high costs because they want a specific type of client. They're not just going to do any old onboarding. Almost everything they're going to do is custom and bespoke, and so it doesn't make sense. So by using competitor benchmarks, they're like, okay, if everybody's used to paying this for like average, results, we need to price here. So we make it clear that you're gonna now if we don't deliver, that falls apart very quickly. But when you do deliver and you get these just testimonials and all these things that prove that if people are willing and they want the quality, right, that they will pay, that level. And like you did here, like it's okay to just sell one or two when you're getting that, you know, huge sale.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, because there's this perception of value, and so when you have this higher ticket item, there's going to be perception there's a lot more going to it, and so that's where you need to be really cognizant about how you're positioning yourself to provide this offering. And I would encourage transparency very, very highly for this. And the thing that I've seen all too often is that so many different like agencies, consultancies, whomever will offer, using this case, HubSpot onboarding, but will gate their pricing until you're deep within the sales call. For this kind of experience, this I disagree with that. I strongly believe that your pricing for something like a HubSpot onboarding should be very accessible and very easy for your customers and potential customers to find, because it's something that they should be able to quickly know and understand the value of your services. And if you're able to say, hey, our pricing model for HubSpot onboarding is $4,000 and up, they have a benchmark. But if you're charging that $4,000, which is already $1,000 more than what HubSpot's general onboarding is, and maybe it's $800 more than your competition, who's usually charging around $3,200, you better be able to articulate very effectively why yours is priced higher and why people should have reason to talk to you. And if you're not doing that, you should really be considering why exactly you're charging that. And if you need to make adjustments, do so. Because otherwise, you're going to be sitting here and you're going to have a lot of experiences, which a lot of agencies, not a lot of agencies, but several agencies can have in their initial start, where they're trying to find a pricing positioning page. They set themselves up for whatever that pricing is, and then they fail because they've either under marketed their services and done $1,200 for a HubSpot onboarding, and they're just overwhelmed and not making profit, or they're charging too much for their pricing and no one wants to bite, or it finds somewhere in the middle where they actually have a good pricing level. However, you're not really discerning and communicating why you are different and why people should be coming to work with you. And so that's where it kind of gets into the value of something along the lines of marrying all of this over to your deal-based system. And when I'm talking your deal, I'm referring to pipelines and everything you have within your sales side of things and your nurturing side of things. You need to understand what all of this looks like and be able to articulate where your steps are. So where you're going to get started, how your people are going to have a conversation with you, whether or not you could solve their problem, and really be able to answer and build out all of these questions in order to get to the position of setting up your pricing. Because without any of that, you're already doing yourself a disservice, and you need to have this information before you could even have the conversation about pricing strategy.
Yes. And guaranteed you already have most of the information. It's just either in people's heads, in spreadsheets,
Mm-hmm.
in multiple systems. So I'm going to share my screen because, like, so much of this is just visibility first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like, so here's a very simple deal view. And like, let's not even think about automation and calculation and anything like that, because simply having everything together, you will get signals, you will get qualitative signals to really just, punch you in the face sometimes if something's not going right and you're like, oh, we're selling a bunch of stuff, but revenue's not going up. Like, what's happening? Right. Because all the leaders I talk to, want to connect these dots with
Mm-hmm.
everything that the business is doing. So if we got a deal here, we're selling one line item, and this is where it can be helpful to understand, products, line item quotes, how everything moves together. Um, but when we say like there's power in just moving your spreadsheet or Word doc based quoting process and just putting it inside of HubSpot, right? This is why that's so powerful. So if we look at our line items here, we go to edit line items. And in theory, your salesperson, right, especially if it's a full funnel rep, they are empowered to do whatever they need to do with all of these strategies, understanding the nuance of the current sale that they're going to make adjustments on the fly. That's the way line items are built. That's the way quotes are built. Like, it can be, decision day and the competitor makes a play, and within 5 minutes you can do a counter quote versus needing to send to like a quotes team to redo stuff, right? So we see things here. This is where some of these you define at the product level in the product library. Some are defined like quantity, for example, is a uh, line item only property. Uh, but we see things like unit price, unit discount, tax rate, net price, MRR, ARR. If we edit columns, we can add um, like annual contract value, margin, right? So let's add that in there. I don't think I have cost in here, right? So let's add that in. Like, how many times does the customer want like a specific, if we're buying and reselling and they just want to get the thing from you, but maybe they don't want, that brand. They want this, higher class brand, right? Managing that is possible. So if we got $89.95, we'll put the unit cost at $19.95, right? Margin calculated, right? Now we go to like creating a quote, and again we get to, so now we're sharing some information, with the customer, and it's very easy to decide what and what not to be sharing. This is where maybe we're in a you'll run into this sometimes. Like, I already created this quote, so the line items I just changed, it did not come over because this quote is already created and they're not talking to each other. So, but maybe we're talking to C-suite, and we're speaking in terms of like, okay, what kind of great pricing, can I get if I'm going to buy 100 units, 200 units, right? You can start to play with these, and maybe you are like, because of the relationship, you're showing them more of this information than you would another, one-time sale. We have payment schedules on the bottom here. But then, so let's say we constantly have visibility, like each line item in the process, whether it's custom or planned. We have developed this process and create this visibility around the data. Now, that is process, right? But here's where you don't even need, you can start to get signals, right? So there's like $7,000 margin on this one product, right? Now I'm on this deal, and maybe we're in orders as we focus on post sale stuff too. But I come down here, maybe there's 10 tickets related to this deal. And like, is that a signal that that 7,000 margin isn't actually $7,000 because we've had to spend 10 hours, you know, fixing problems or installation like went unplanned. And sometimes we're tracking this in other systems, sometimes we're not. Ultimately, this is why we want all the data in one place. We always want to understand leads and how those relate to, margins and revenue. Did it create any other deals? Right? Because then if it's $0 onboarding, but it created this $20,000 margin deal, right? Then it's worth it, right? Did the event that we went to like create the deal? And what kind of customers? Was it the $0 onboarding customers, or was it the bigger customers? So all this, just bringing it into one place. It doesn't mean HubSpot has to generate all of the data, but when we talk about the value of simply just moving the process into HubSpot without even changing it that much, this is the power of that. Because sure, you probably got started with a spreadsheet, right? That's where we all have to start, just to understand like what's going on. And you can calculate everything I just showed in a spreadsheet, but it's not going to show you, oh, we've got 10 tickets related to this thing. Oh, we've got 600 emails from this customer a month. And that's probably eats away at all the margin, right? Showing competitive information right on these deals. All of that, it becomes possible. I'll say it's pretty impossible when you're working on a spreadsheet. Like, there's lots of ways to automate it, but just, bringing it into the same place. It's what we're talking about when we say map, the strategy into HubSpot,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it's happening outside of HubSpot, you lose on all of these visibility wins that just are much easier than most people think, and are very powerful once you understand,
Yeah.
what these screens are showing you.
Yeah. And using those associations as an example, I've seen a good practice of actually creating quote unquote fake deals and having an alternate deal pipeline that only includes your competition's data. And that way, like when you are creating sales or line items or quotes, you have all of your information in your HubSpot instance, so you can create the deal associated with your competition's same value prop, maybe same line item, etc. And you can see at a glance how you're doing in comparison. And if you want to take that a step further, there are ways to create those items via API. And this is getting more technical, but if you build like bot scraping tools in order to fetch that information for you and pipe it into your HubSpot portal, you could have all of that data applied to you real time so that you know what your competition is charging at any given point in time. So that when you're creating new products, new deals, new services, you're able to implement the pricing accordingly or make those discounts accordingly or maybe even do markups. However you want to do, the important thing is really having all this information unified. And the only way to do that is to build out your effective map of understanding where are you now, where do you want to go, and take iterative steps to get there. Because yes, we are advocating for you to have as much of your information within HubSpot as you can. but we also acknowledge that that doesn't happen overnight. So if you need to start with a spreadsheet and then make your way over into that, that is no problem. But make sure that you're doing that and you're that's the most important bit, because if this is living in your head or someone else on your team's head, this isn't going to be something that you're going to be able to mass reproduce and help you scale with. And over time, as you're able to bring that more and more into a single system, that's going to be that much more power that you will then have to influence your customers, to influence your prospects to become customers.
Yeah, and influence your customers to buy more stuff too,
Yeah,
right? Like,
and make them advocates and evangelists for your brand, instead of just, yeah, I'm Brian, I pay Chris for services. It's, I'm Brian and Chris does an amazing job, and hey Chris, I have a new person who might be interested in working with you. Like,
yeah,
that's the difference. That's the ability to generate referrals, and those referrals we all see tend to be a big driving factor for new business.
yeah. Generally, better opportunities, better time
Mm-hmm.
spent. But this is what we're talking about when we say that the hardest decision is just to decide that you want to do this. Because literally, I know there's spreadsheets of products with pricing and margins that you could easily import into HubSpot. Deals are very easy to set up.
Mm-hmm.
Like HubSpot as a complete system is very complex,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to start there and you shouldn't start there. It's like, what do I have? What do I know? Bring that in, understand what's possible, and start where we can start, right? This doesn't mean you have your ticketing system and you start to bring in all these things, but let's start at like where the goals are. And if the goals are like, I need more visibility over the margin and who's the best customers and who we keep losing to, why do we keep losing to them, who are we beating,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why are we beating them? All that stuff. Most leaders will tell you that they want to understand this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can get that, HubSpot, one of the best tools positioned to help you, because it does start to create that visibility in the context of the entire journey,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this has been great. I love walking through these one at a time. I'm glad you slowed us down because, I'd have been out there like, all right, here's all the 5 things and let's get them
Yep.
all in. But there is a lot of nuance here that at the end of the day, most businesses have products and services that cover all 5 categories.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, as we go through these, by the time we get to number 5, value based, there's probably some revenue, you're leaving on the table. That the whole goal is understanding this pricing strategy across your portfolio, across the markets you serve, and put everybody in a more successful situation, to sell and win in a way that's profitable and sustainable for the business. So
We'll be
as
covering
we,
all that information over the next couple weeks too, and basically showing, like, next week we'll round out what's left on these pricing models, and then uh, the week after that is when we're going to finish this series and really dive into the value of value-based pricing and tying all of this together and really getting nitty-gritty deep into how to implement this within your HubSpot portal.
indeed. So as you look at your products and quotes and, maybe some profitability and some margin, look for those opportunities and let's grow. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care, all.